Hello guys, Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and I'm really happy to be here today presenting a new video. So today's video is another GPU comparison, this time the RX 580 versus the RX 5700 XT versus the RX 6700 XT. Basically, I did a poll like some days ago, and by some days I mean like a week ago I think, where I actually let you choose some of the next videos, by order of course, and the one you voted the most was the RX 580 versus 5700 XT versus 6700 XT, and mostly because there are lots of people with a 580 that want to upgrade to the 5700 XT or the 6700 XT, or even the guys with the 5700 XT that want to upgrade to the 6700 XT, when there are available GPUs at common price, but well, this video does not serve for only now. Well, this video does not serve for only now, but also in the future, so that's why I'm making it. And well, you also have this video of the 5700 XT versus 6700 XT versus 6800 that I did like 2 weeks ago I think, and you have this awesome video comparison that I did, a full video comparison of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey versus Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The video is worth watching in my opinion. Before going to the results, let's just pass by the sponsor of today's video. For today's sponsor we have GVG Mall, where you can acquire your Windows 10 Home serial key for only $16, and using my SKAG discount code will get you 20% off, making it only $11. After the payment you'll receive the key in your account, and after getting it you simply need to introduce it in your Windows settings and BAM! You have an activated system. And now finally, let's go!
Hidden behind that poster that leads to the real world. We all feel safe in that room. But sometimes something crawls out from behind the poster. And the ones that see it happen freak out and try to forget what they saw.
Today's first game is Remedy's Control, using the X12 and high settings, which are the max ones apart from ray tracing. Here we can see that nowadays the RX 580 is at max a 1080p card for most games, and in Control, to reach 60 FPS we would need to turn down some settings to medium, even at 1080p. The RX 5700 XT is a major upgrade over the RX 580, delivering almost double the performance at 1080p, and the RX 6700 XT is even a bigger one. Going from the 5700 XT to the 6700 XT would be a good upgrade, but not near as good as going from the RX 580 to either of the previous ones. As for 4K results, the RX 580 can't deliver us 30 FPS, which is quite expected in a game as heavy as Control, where the RX 5700 XT struggles to do that, being the 6700 XT the only GPU here delivering us over 40 average FPS, and by a rough margin. Now with Assassin's Creed Valhalla using the X12 and very high settings. As for the RX 5700 XT, it is performing pretty well at 1080p with almost 90 average FPS, and even at 1440p with almost 70. The 6700 XT is a nice upgrade in both resolutions, being even more relevant when activating SAM. At 4K, the RX 580 delivers once again around 20 average FPS, which is like a PowerPoint presentation to my eyes, and the 5700 XT gets us roughly 40 average FPS, with the 6700 XT being the only one above that. Gears 5 is a really heavy title once played at ultra settings, and even using the X12, the RX 580 stays once again around the 50 average FPS at 1080p, but interestingly, it has only a minor drop of around 7 average FPS when going to 1440p. The RX 5700 XT has around 90 average FPS at 1080p, but drops to around 60 when going for 1440p, making the difference in between both cards a bit less, while the 6700 XT is in its own league with almost 90 average FPS at 1440p. At 4K, the RX 580 gets oddly close to the 5700 XT, delivering us almost the same results, which is very intriguing. But I mean, even the RX 6700 XT gets a massive performance drop when going from 1440p to 4K, so yeah, I mean, it seems normal. Let's move on. Rainbow Six Siege it is, using Vulkan, ultra settings and the usual 100% render scale. This is a pretty old game that, although it is continuously updated, it came out in 2015 and the game engine is quite old, hence the results we see here. The RX 580 still manages to deliver 170 average FPS at 1080p and over 100 at 1440p, which is really good for new people that are playing mostly Rainbow Six Siege. Obviously, the 5700 XT delivers once again almost double the performance of the RX 580, and the 6700 XT pushes it even further to crazy numbers like 400 average FPS. At 1440p, the 6700 XT pushes almost 270 average FPS at ultra settings, and at 4K, the RX 580 is finally put below the 60 average FPS mark, with the 5700 XT doing over 100 and the 6700 XT almost reaching 130. This time with Ghost Recon Breakpoint, one of the best optimized games from Ubisoft, that actually performed like crap before Vulkan API saved it. I mean, such a great game! At very high settings, the RX 580 can finally deliver over 60 average FPS at 1080p in a decently heavy title, which is not bad at all, but in comparison, the RX 5700 XT is delivering around 146, which is more than double of the RX 580. At 4K, the RX 5700 XT has once again doubled the RX 580's performance, and the 6700 XT manages to deliver us around 80 average FPS, which at 4K is a very good result. Now we have the beloved Red Dead Redemption 2, which is an astonishing piece of art, so if you haven't played it yet, go for it. We're using Vulkan and high settings, and the results are once again interesting. Since these are results from the inbuilt benchmark, the results of the minimums aren't usually very precise, so take that in consideration. The RX 580 somehow manages to get higher minimums at 1080p than all the cards apart from the RX 6700 XT using SAM. That gets a huge boost in terms of performance, mostly in the minimums, which is strange, but it is what it is, I guess. As for the averages, the RX 580 is once again delivering us around 50 average FPS at 1080p and almost 40 at 1440p. With the 5700 XT going from over 90 average FPS at 1080p and almost 70 at 1440p. When going for 4K, things get messy, with only 21 average FPS for the RX 580 and with the 6700 XT being the card that gets close to the 60 average FPS mark once activating SAM. The Division 2 is another well-optimized title from Ubisoft, and I like to test it due to that, and due to, of course, being heavy on the GPU. The results for the RX 580 are more or less in what we had in the other games. As for the other cards, they can both deliver very good numbers at 1080p and 1440p, with the RX 6700 XT delivering over 90 average FPS, even at 1440p, and of course, with SAM making absolutely no difference here. As for the 4K results, they are miserable for the RX 580, staying in the 17 average FPS mark, and even 30 FPS would be hard for this card at 4K. As for the 5700 XT and 6700 XT, they have decent results, having in consideration we're using ultra settings.
Father would kill me if he finds out I went up with you. Twice if he learns we've been to a Hansa off-limit zone.
Reaching the final line, we have Metro Exodus, once again using the X12, ultra settings and tessellation on. The results for the RX 580 are around the same as in all other games, while the 5700 XT pushes once again double the FPS of the RX 580, and the 6700 XT has as much FPS in the 1% lows as the 5700 XT has in averages, this at 1080p and 1440p. At 4K we have the RX 580 giving us a Charlie Chaplin experience and the 5700 XT hardly getting 40 average FPS. Once again, the 6700 XT is the only GPU reaching the 50 average FPS mark at 4K Ultra. Our last game is Forza Horizon 4, another game where the RX 580 can achieve over 60 average FPS at 1080p, even at maximum settings. That shows us how well the game is optimized. Forza Horizon 4 also benefits a lot from SAM, giving the RX 6700 XT astonishing performance levels across all resolutions. I mean, the RX 5700 XT and 6700 XT aren't that far in this game in terms of raw performance, they're actually pretty close. But once we activate SAM, the RX 6700 XT has a phenomenal jump and leaves the RX 5700 XT in the dust. At 4K, it is more or less the same, with the RX 580 reaching 30 average FPS, the RX 5700 XT reaching 60, and the RX 6700 XT being around 75, managing to go up to 88 when activating SAM. Exceptional results for all cards in this game. Let's move to the conclusion. So guys, conclusion. What do you think about the results? Okay, in my opinion, and just my opinion of course, GPU prices are crazy nowadays. Maybe in, let's say, like half a year, 1 year, GPU prices will come back to the normal values, and we will have more stock, I hope, and so on. So maybe this video will serve you, or is serving you, like in 2022 instead of 2021 like we are now, or in the end of 2021. In this case we're in May, but maybe you're watching this video not in May. Or maybe in May 2022. Who knows? But well, that's just in terms of prices. In terms of performance, the RX 580 is nowadays only at max a 1080p card, let's say a 1080p medium to high settings card, okay? Some lighter games, of course, you can play them at 1440p maybe, some games at 1440p medium, 1440p low, but it's usually just a 1080p 60 FPS card, okay? And in some games, if you want higher settings, you won't even be able to get 60 FPS by playing at 1080p. So if you want 60 FPS, you have to decrease the options to, let's say, 1080p medium or 1080p high. In some games, like I said, medium, because high won't cut it to 60 FPS. Now, as for the RX 5700 XT, it is completely leagues above the RX 580, which is normal because the RX 580 had an MSRP, I think, of $199, something like that, while the 5700 XT had an MSRP of $400, $399, I think, so, or $450, something like that. So the price difference in terms of MSRP is quite a lot, and in terms of computer units and everything, the 5700 XT is just way better and has a new architecture, the RDNA architecture. Even if you compare the 5700 XT to a Vega 56, like I have in this video, the difference is significant. So we have better performance, quite better performance in some games, with the same power draw, or in some cases even less. So it is there, the difference is there. As for the 6700 XT, better performance than the 5700 XT at lower power consumption. Usually it stays in between, let's say, the 140 watts to 180 watts, maybe 190, but usually in between that, like 140, 160, 180, around that, depending on the resolution and the game, of course. But it is really a good improvement in terms of performance per watt. Really good for the 6700 XT. So if you can find one at a decent price, get it. Or if you can change your 5700 XT for a miner 6700 XT, because the 5700 XT actually mines better than the 6700 XT. So if you want to trade with a miner, they will most likely want to trade with you. And if you just want to game, well, the 6700 XT is way better. And if you activate SAM, which you can do like in Intel CPUs, 10th gen, 11th gen, and you can do in Ryzen 3000 and 5000 series, so if you can activate SAM, it is even better. And in some games, the performance comparing to the 5700 XT is much better. And if you go from a 580 to a 6700 XT, the difference is phenomenal. So yeah. Now, enough talking, thanks a lot for watching, don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video because that really helps a lot. Also, I just bought today the Ryzen 5 4650G, so it's an APU, it's an APU that usually comes on the OEM builds, so the pre-built PCs, but it is really nice, so I got it for 150 euros used. I think that, I know that the person also knew me from my channel, which is pretty nice, at least in Portugal, because nobody knows me, obviously. But well, back to the APU, I'll be testing this as an APU, and I'll be testing this in terms of CPU power. And I will compare the CPU power of this little guy versus the 3600 and the 2600X, and maybe even the 5600X. But in terms of APU things, it will be really nice to test an APU again, finally. Thanks a lot for watching, don't forget, once again, like, subscribe and share this video, and hope you enjoyed the info. See you in the next one.